If you're watching this video right now, most likely you already have a Push 3 or you are considering getting one. If you have one already, most likely you're curious about how does this thing work and how can I get the most out of it. If you don't quite have one yet, you're most likely wondering, is this thing for me? And the easiest way to know if it's for you is to understand it at a deep level. In this video, I'm going to answer all of those questions by going super deep into everything you need to know about Push 3 in 30 minutes. Hey yo, it's Alex from My Music. I'm a musician, producer, and certified audio engineer here to help you make better music and unlock your creative potential. Push 3 is an absolute powerhouse in designing expressive instruments, flowing out ideas effortlessly, experimenting and developing those ideas further, as well as getting a rough sketch of a composition all within this device. Those are consequently the first 4 stages of the process that I use and the process that I teach my students, which makes Push 3 an absolute perfect fit for me. If you want to learn more about my process or the system that I teach called Workflow Wizardry, you can check out the masterclass with the link below to learn more. By the end of this video, you're going to know this thing like the back of your hand and understand if this thing would help you make better music, make you finish more music, if it's going to enhance your workflow and your creativity, or if it's maybe more just an expensive toy that you don't really need. Before we dive into the nitty-gritty details, let me give you a quick overview of how Push 3 works so that you can get your head around at least its basic functionality. And then we're going to dive really deep into what this thing can do. The first thing to notice is that we have a display up here, and then we also have pads. These are the 2 main interfaces that you're going to have with Push 3, and they can both exist in many different modes. We also have a lot of buttons, as you can see, right? We have buttons all the way up the left side here, all the way up the right side, and we also have a giant jog wheel. We have another wheel here, a third wheel, and then we have a bunch of inputs and different connectivity at the back. And the biggest thing about Push 3 is that everything acts differently depending on what mode you're in. Right now, I am in device view, and I have a melodic device on this track. So I can play chords, melodies with this device, right? And all the controls for this device are up here. If I go ahead and select this other track, now you'll see that I am on a drum track. I can play that, and all of the controls for this drum track have now been populated on the display. The same thing happens with the pads, is that depending on what you're focused on, the pads will rearrange themselves relative to that. Right now I have a drum track selected. All of my drums for that track populate on these pads. If I go ahead and select a bass track, the pads have changed again to represent the chromatic scale like you would see on a piano in this case, and now I can play notes. Here's an overview of the different modes. First of all, we have device view. So if we hit this little device button in the top right-hand corner, it will show us the settings for whatever device of the currently selected track that we have. Let's go ahead and hit the mix view button up here to bring in mix view. Now, again, all of these bottom buttons still select our tracks, but the context of the display is that it's showing us our volume, our pan, our sends, and also other track settings, which we'll get to a little bit later. Let's move ahead to clip view. In clip view, we're actually seeing the programmed MIDI and or the audio sample of whatever track that you have selected. If I go over to this bass, you can see that we have a bass clip that I played around with. Push 3 comes in 2 configurations. It comes in a standalone version and a controller only version, which can be upgraded in the future. I'm going to cover the standalone version in this video because some of the features are only for standalone, and the standalone version can do everything that the controller version can do. The first thing to point out is that Push 3 can operate in 2 different modes, standalone mode and control mode. And in standalone mode, Push 3 is running Ableton on its own computer. You can be untethered from the computer and take Push 3 anywhere and use Ableton that is built in to the device. In controller mode, you have to connect this to a computer that is running Ableton. To access those settings, you want to hit the setup button, which is this little gear icon, which will show you Push 3's settings. In this settings menu, you can hit these different display buttons to change tabs and to show you different settings. And we just want to be in the status tab. This will show you Push 3 status, such as its battery life, its available storage, if it's in standalone mode or if it's in control mode, etc. Let's move over to the next tab called expression. In this tab, we have our settings for MPE and we have different expression modes. MPE essentially enables all of the MPE features. If we go to poly aftertouch, we're going to get only pressure aftertouch, which is similar to how push 2 was. Then mono aftertouch is essentially no MPE control at all. Next, we have note pitch bend. Essentially, note pitch bend allows devices that can accept that data to receive it. With this setting on, you can not only pitch bend one note, but you can pitch bend multiple notes at the same time. The next setting is the in-tune location, and you can change these settings with the encoder on top of them, just like everything else. But adjusting these settings will change the way your finger responds to the placement on the pads relative to the pitch. If you put this to finger, no matter where my finger lands on the pad, it's going to be in pitch. There will be zero pitch bend that happens. Whether I hit this on the right of the pad or the left of the pad, you'll notice that we're in pitch. If I change this to pad, now the center of the pad will have zero pitch bend and the right or left of the pad will have pitch bend. If I hit it right in the center, we're in pitch. If we go slightly to the right, we're sharp. Slightly to the left, we are flat. The next setting is your width setting. The width is essentially the x-axis for your pads and how sensitive it is. The smaller the number, the more sensitive it's going to be for your pitch left and right. The next setting is your slide height. This is very similar to the x-axis, but in the y-axis. This is the sensitivity for the slide MPE function. The smaller number will make it more sensitive. These are great things to adjust to really dial this in to something that feels right. Next, we're going to hit the sensitivity tab, and this will let you adjust how hard you have to hit the pads to create notes. The threshold control will dictate how much force you need to trigger the pad, and a lower amount will equal less force needed. Here, I barely have to touch the pad for it to trigger. With this set high, I have to hit harder and harder. Let's move on to the audio tabs. Now we have access to all of our audio settings. With this first encoder, we have our sample rate, which we can change. The next setting is our buffer size, which is great for latency. The lower your buffer size, the more CPU it's going to use, but the less latency you're going to have. If you're running into a lot of latency, that's what I would adjust first. If you're starting to hit the ceiling of what the Push 3 can do, then I would consider increasing the buffer size to reduce the CPU load and go from there. Next, let's go to the Wi-Fi tab, and this lets Push 3 connect to a Wi-Fi network to download packs, to install updates, and transfer files between Ableton and Push. So pretty simple there. You just choose the network and you connect to it, enter the password, and you're good to go. Let's move on to connectivity. Push 3 was definitely designed with connectivity in mind. Push 3 has a built-in audio interface that can be used directly with Live. Push 3 also has two direct outputs for direct out 1 and direct out 2, so you can connect speakers or monitors directly to it using those ports. Output 1 is left, output 2 is right, and you can connect your headphones to the headphones output port directly on the back if you want to use it on the go. Next, let's look at adjusting volume. To adjust your main outputs, your headphone outputs, your master track volume, and your cue volume, they can all be controlled using this encoder just to the left of the display. If you just tap on this control, it will show you the current setting that it is to and the value. If I wanted to increase it, I would just turn this knob up. If I want to decrease it, turn it down. And fun fact, if you hold shift and you adjust, you'll adjust in smaller increments. If you want to move to different controls, all you have to do is tap this encoder. And now you can see we are controlling our master volume. If we hit it again, we're controlling the cue volume. And then once again, and we're controlling the main output, and then we cycle back around to the headphones. Next, we can actually navigate sets within Push 3. If you hit the sets button, which is a little folder looking button, if we hit that, it brings up the browser of all the different sets that you have loaded on your Push 3. Click the jog wheel here to load one of them, and you can also create a new set directly from here. Next, we're going to cover one of the most important buttons on Push 3, which is this plus button, which enables you to add devices, add new tracks, add samples, everything with this one button. When you hit it, it's going to pop up the browser on the display, and this will enable you to navigate the browser and select what you want. You can navigate with this jog wheel by just going left and right. If you want to, let's say, add a MIDI track, you can click the jog wheel, and then it opens up that menu. Let's say you want to go to sounds, and then maybe you go to exotic, right? And we have these different instruments. And if you wanted to load that, all you have to do is press the jog wheel and it will load it. If you go to the farthest menu just by clicking left on this encoder, you can access all of your user library, your packs, your samples, all this from that top menu. Next, let's talk about devices and tracks. When you're in your main menu, you can again select different tracks by hitting the display button underneath that track name. Here's my drums, here's my bass, melody, here's our MPE instrument. If you want to add a device to this track, like an effect or something, all you have to do is hit plus while that track is selected, and then you can go ahead and add, let's say, an audio effect, and then you can choose a preset if you want, glitch delay, sure. And then once you have that selected, right, we've added that glitch delay effect on top of this sound. Once you have an effect added to a track, you can see that you can select your instrument, which is the synthesizer, the sampler, whatever's creating the sound, and all of the parameters relative to that instrument or that preset that you have. If I wanted to then go and change the effect parameters, I would then click the button over that effect to access the delay settings. If you want to access a deeper level of parameters of both devices or effects, you can hit the button once again, and you'll access more of the parameters of that device if you want to get in the nitty gritty and design something specific. And then when you want to go back to the main level of browsing, you just hit back and then you're back at your top level. If you wanted to add even more effects to a track, all you have to do is make sure that track is selected, hit this plus button, and you can continue to add devices. You can disable devices simply by holding mute and hitting them. And you'll notice that it gets grayed out and all the parameters are grayed out. If you want to re-enable any devices, you can hold mute and press it again. Pro tip for you, if you want to move the position of a MIDI or audio effect, all you have to do is press and hold the display button over that effect and then move the encoder to move its position. Press and hold this and then move this encoder, and you'll notice that it got moved 1, 2 positions over. Now I let go and it's in the position that I want. Next, let's look at the swap button. It is this button right here with the 2 arrows going in a circle. And what this does is it allows you to switch devices on a track. I could select that device that I want to swap and then hit the swap button. And one thing to note is that the browser will show you the device category of the original device. If I hit the hot swap button, you'll notice that we are in the presets for the Echo device. One thing to keep in mind is that once you've loaded an effect, you can play the pads to test it out, right? Instead of getting out of this menu, I can simply navigate to another preset and try it out. Next, let's talk about racks. And essentially, instrument racks, drum racks, and effect racks allow multiple chains of devices to be grouped together into a single device. There's a special icon that represents a rack. With any rack, if you hit the button to select it and hit it again, it opens up the contained devices, which you can then navigate. And then if we want to close it, we can hit it again to close it. A fun fact with the drum rack too is you can hold this to see all of your different samples, so your kicks, your hi-hats, kick again, hi-hat open again, and select them that way. Next, let's talk about tempo and meter. To change the tempo or meter, you're going to use this encoder right here to the left of the pads, and you can just tap this encoder to see the current tempo setting. If you tap and hold, we can see 107.14, very specific. If we then click this parameter, we can see the swing amount and adjust accordingly with this encoder, and then we can click again to go back to the tempo. Another pro tip is you can hold shift and move this encoder to adjust in increments of 0.1 BPM or to fine adjust the swing. You can also tap the tap tempo button to change the tempo of your set, and your set will adjust itself accordingly. And then we can turn it back down if we wanted to. Another tip is that you can tap and hold the metronome button to reveal the metronome settings, right? Such as your count in, the sound of your metronome, and then you can adjust your time signature here as well. Next thing I want to highlight is the save button. If you go ahead and hit save, it will save your live set to your Putch's hard drive, which is incredible to have handy there. Pro tip, if you want to save a live set as a new live set or as a new project, and I do this all the time in my workflow, you can hold Shift and then press the save button. And this will actually save it as a new version. You can see version 2 has now been saved. Now we're working in a copy of the set we were previously working in. Another pro tip is that if you want to save a set as a new project and you want to save it into a new project folder, you can hold the duplicate button and then hit save. And what this will do is create a whole new project folder. Let's look at push 3 as a rhythm instrument. To create beats with push, make sure that you select a track with a drum rack on it and make sure that you are in note mode. If you want to load a new drum kit, you can just hit plus here. Let's go to a MIDI track. Let's go to the drums category and let's find a drum kit. When working with drum rack on the pads, it can be used in 3 different modes. To change modes, all you have to do is press the layout button here and you'll cycle between these modes. We have our loop selector mode, which is your default mode with a drum rack. We have our 16 velocities mode, and we have our 64 pad grid mode as well. And you hit the layout button once again, and we're back to our loop selector mode. Let's start with loop selector mode. In this mode, you have 3 sections, which lets you play the pads, sequence notes, and adjust the length of your clip. The bottom left 16 pads, this 4x4 grid, is your drum rack pads, and this allows you real-time playing of the pads, right? When you have more than 16 pads in your drum rack, you can use the touch strip to move to different pads if you want, and you can also use the octave buttons to show other pads that you have in your drum rack by groups of 16. The top 32 pads in this mode are a step sequencer. To add steps to a sequence with a drum pad, all you have to do is tap a pad that you want to program, and then from there, you want to press the pads in the sequencer that you want the step to go with that sound. As soon as you add a step, it's going to start playback. So let's go ahead and put it on the 1 count of everything, right? If I wanted to, let's say add a hi-hat, it's very easy to go ahead and start sequencing a beat. You can delete steps if we select the hi-hat simply by hitting those steps once again, and we can remove all of our hi-hats that we've programmed simply by hitting them again. Pro tip, if you want to delete all of the steps of a specific drum rack pad in a sequence, you can hold delete and hit that pad to delete all of the steps. If you want to see the steps that you're programming into the clip, you can hit the clip view up here to see what you're programming. In clip view, you can hold a pad or group of pads to access various editing controls such as nudge, length, velocity, etc. And then you can edit those parameters with their knobs. For example, right here, we have our kick. And if we go ahead and press and hold these, you'll notice that it selects them in clip view and we have access to all of these controls that pop up. So let's say we wanted to increase the velocity of both these steps. We could do so here, and then we could select these two and increase these a little bit. You'll notice the pads get a little bit darker. The bottom right quadrant of our pads is what is called the loop selector. You can use this bottom right 4x4 pad to set the length of the loop, as well as what specific section of the loop that you can see or edit in the sequencer. Each pad corresponds to a page of steps, and the length depends on the resolution that you have set. And by default, the resolution is 16 notes for a total length of 2 bars. You can see that in these top 32 pads, we can see all of the notes for 2 bars, right? And our 2 bars are here. I'm going to hit this double loop button to effectively duplicate our loop. It's super easy to change the length of your loop. All you have to do is hold the first part of the pad that you want to loop and then hit the selection for the second one. You'll notice that now our loop length is 2 bars. I could also do this by holding the second part of the loop and this one to have the loop length be 2 bars, but we're only playing bar 2 and bar 3 in a loop. Pro tip is that you can quickly set the length of your loop to being 1 page by quickly double tapping one of these loop pads. If I double tap this, you'll notice that it immediately just selects this bar and starts looping it. I could do the same with bar 3, with bar 2, bar 4, do bar 1 to 4, 1 to 2, etc. Let's look at the next drum pad mode by hitting the layout button, which brings us to 16 velocities mode. This is the same as loop selector mode, but the loop length controls in the bottom right hand 4x4 grid here become velocity pads instead. The great tip here is that you can play different velocity pads in real time, and this is especially great with the repeat button. This is super powerful for programming expressive drum parts with these 16 velocity pads. So for example, if I select the snare, now all of these pads will be different velocities of that same snare pad, right? But this lets me play it, so maybe I want to do a snare roll and just ascend up these pads, right? Makes it easy to get those expressive performances. It's a good thing to note that these different velocity pads can be selected to program into the sequencer as well. Maybe we want to program super dynamic hits, right? For the beginning of a phrase, something like this. And then maybe over here, we add in some more intense notes. And then maybe on the downbeats, we throw in heavier handed notes and get like a hi-hat roll. And don't forget that when you're doing this, you can also edit those velocities with the clip view by holding pads. Maybe you want these ones to be slightly louder, this one to be slightly louder. You can edit them after the fact as well. Let's explore the third mode of the drum rack pads. If we hit layout once again, we can get 64 pad mode, which is amazing. I'm gonna go over here to a drum kit that has 64 pads. Now we have drum pads on every single pad on push that have different samples loaded up so that we can play it in real time. Pro tip, if you hold the layout button, it will give you temporary access to your loop selector controls up here. Let's say you're programming this beat and you actually just want to focus on the first section of the loop. You can do that and then let go, and then you're back in 64 pad grid mode. You can hold shift and hit layout to lock it there. If you want to unlock, just hit layout again and it will go back to the full 64 pad grid mode. It's worth talking about loading individual samples because each of these pads on this drum rack are different samples, and we can swap these out whenever we want. You can enter hot swap mode to load or replace pads in the drum rack. By default, a drum rack selects the whole drum rack. So if I were to hit the hot swap button here, you'll notice that everything is blinking on and off, telling me that I am swapping the entire drum rack. If I wanted to just change out specific pads instead of the whole drum rack, I would want to select this pad button here, and then whatever pad I have will be selected to swap out. Now, when I hit the hot swap button, you'll notice that it loads immediately to drum hits, and I can start to browse around for a different kick sound maybe. When you have the pad selected, you can select it again to open up more control. Now we can see the sample that is loaded on this pad, and we can adjust all these settings. Just a fun tip, if you hold shift and select a drum rack pad, you can change the color of that pad specifically to any color that you want. Next, let's move on to playing and programming melodies and harmonies. The push pads, as we've seen before, can be used as a fully expressive melodic and harmonic instrument. Imagine a mix of a piano with the white and black keys shown by the lit up pads in the scale of C major, mixed with a guitar because these different rows are separated by fourths, and a drum kit because you're hitting pads, which is like finger drumming, and it's really rhythmic in nature for how you produce notes here. It's a really good mix of a lot of different instruments, which makes it its own unique instrument. And this with MPE makes it completely next level. When a MIDI track with an instrument is selected and you're in note mode, your push will default to this 8 pad grid for playing musical notes. It's automatically configured to the 64 pad layout, and in this case, I'm in chromatic mode. We'll talk more about that in just a sec. By default, I believe it's in C major and with in key mode selected. From the default setting, the bottom leftmost pad is C1. And if you play the next note to the right of C1, in this case, we're in C major, you're gonna get the second note of C major, which is D, and then onwards to E, F, G, A, B, and then you're back to C. So essentially this bottom row and the top row of pads in key mode will play the whole scale for you, right? You can also play these pads by moving up rows. In this case, in key mode, you can move up in groups of 3 to play the scale as well. I can play it like this. And then we have an octave here. And if we start on this octave, again, we can play in groups of 3 to play the scale. The melodic pads also have 3 modes, and they're pretty similar to the drum modes. The first one is 64 notes. As we can see right now, all the pads give us the ability to play notes in different octave ranges. The darker pads represent your root note, which is determined by whatever root note you have selected here. And the rest of the lit up pads represent the other notes of your selected scale. With these octave up and down arrows, you can transpose up or down an entire octave. In key mode, playing a triad is pretty basic. It looks like a little triangle, this shape. Right, we won't get into all the music theory, but this is essentially root, third, fifth, right? We can play all the diatonic triads of C major or whatever scale you're in simply by playing this shape and moving it up. If we hit the scale button, it brings up all of our options for changing the scale, the root notes, and a bunch of different settings in the browser window. If you want to switch the pads to different keys and different scales, use the encoders to select a different scale. For example, I could switch to minor, and now the pads have magically changed themselves to playing C minor. And fun little fact that this organization of the different root notes are separating the root notes by fifths, right? Which is the same thing as the circle of fifths. Very handy to learn a little bit more music theory, that we have our circle of fifths essentially represented by the order of these root notes. Adjusting this layout control will change the relationship of the tuning between these various rows. Right now it's tuned in fourths, so we have C, F, B, so on and so forth. But if we wanted to change this, we could tune in thirds, right? Which is pretty strange, but you'll notice how the arrangement of the root notes have changed. You can also change this to sequential, which you can see is essentially giving you a bunch of octaves, right? This is just a fun way to visualize your music differently. And next button to highlight is the in-key or chromatic mode. The in-key mode will only show you the notes of your currently selected scales. Right now, we are only seeing the notes of C major because that's what we have selected. If I go to E flat and select Lydian, now we're only seeing the notes of E flat Lydian. If you really want to unlock push as a fully expressive melodic instrument, then you definitely want to be playing around in chromatic mode where you can see all the notes that are available. You still get the benefit of seeing the notes that you have selected in your scale parameters up here lit up on the pads, but you can access outside notes as well. I won't go down the rabbit hole of the advantages and disadvantages of each, but one of the advantages of chromatic mode is that you have repeatable shapes. In chromatic mode, that's a major triad, and a minor triad looks different, but a minor triad will always have that shape, no matter where you play it, right? So you can learn repeatable patterns and shapes in chromatic mode versus in key mode, there's no really visual feedback as to what chord you're playing. Next, let's talk about MPE melodies and harmonies. MPE brings in a lot more control that we didn't have before, which inches Push 3 closer towards being an expressive instrument like a guitar or piano, because you have a lot more options to inject dynamics into your performances and playing your parts, which is amazing. Let's break it down. First, we have pressure, and pressure is essentially how much finger pressure is given after the initial note is struck. In other words, it's aftertouch. For example, I can play a chord, and then after I've struck the notes, I can add pressure or reduce pressure to affect the sound. Next is the slide control. The slide control is the vertical movement on the pads, which is essentially the Y-axis up and down. And you can play a note on a pad and then move your finger up or down to affect the sound. You can play a note and then either strike the pad or move your finger up and down on the Y-axis to create different sounds with each strike. So for example, on this MPE dulcimer pad, depending on where I strike the pad on the Y-axis up and down will change the timbre of the sound. The next MPE control is per note pitch bend. This is essentially the horizontal movement on the pads. So left to right on the X axis, right? And you can play a note on a pad and move your finger left and right to affect the pitch. So if I play something here, I can go sharp, or I can go under it to go flat, just by being on one single pad. You can also slide from pad to pad. So let's say you're doing a run. You can press and hold a pad and slide it to a different one. This very similar to the fretboard on a guitar neck, right? Next, let's move on to the melodic sequencer. Similar to the drum rack modes, we have different melodic pad modes. If you're in melodic pad mode and you hit the layout button, it will give you another melodic pad mode. This one is called the melodic sequencer. We can place notes on the 8 rows of pads. One thing to highlight is that depending what scale mode you're in, if you're in key mode, then all the pads will show you the in key pads for whatever scale you have chosen. In chromatic mode, it will still show you the pads for whatever scale you're in, but it will also show you the notes outside the scale. Let's go to clip view and let's start penciling some notes by just simply hitting the pads. By default, your root note will be accessible at the bottom row of these pads. All these white pads represent our root note, which is C in this case, and each column of pads represent one step in time as we start moving forward. Pressing a pad in a column will add that note in the corresponding step and also start playback. And everything else is the same as the drum sequencer. Let's go ahead and put a root note. Let's go ahead and throw in some thirds. Let's do some sevenths. And a pro tip here is that in the melodic sequencer, you can also access your loop length control. We only have access to one page, as we can see in the clip view up here. If I wanted to move pages over, I could hit the page button to the right, and now I'm focused on that section of our clip, and so on and so forth. But another way to control that, and maybe I just want this section to loop over and over, is by using the loop length controls. To access this in this mode, you can just hold the layout button, and you'll notice that this whole row actually turned into our loop selectors. So I can just, again, double tap that to keep cycling our first loop. Again, I can hold it again, and I'm gonna hold the first one, press the fourth one, to go back to looping all 4 of our bars. And if you want to lock the loop selector on the top here, you can hold shift and layout. And now the loop selector will be locked to the top so we can sequence in notes and navigate the loops we want, right? So if I double tap here, here's our first loop, right? Maybe I double tap here, I pencil in some root notes, some more thirds, right? Maybe we throw in the 7 here, and maybe we'll play a different one here. Maybe we'll play the 5th, right? If you want to unlock the loop selector from up here, just hit layout again, and now it's unlocked. And keep in mind that the editing functions are the same as the drum sequencer. So you can press and hold notes to adjust maybe their velocity, to nudge them backwards in time. You can adjust their length if you want them to be long. And you can see that visually represented here where I'm extending the length of these 3 notes. Let's go to the next mode, which is the melodic sequencer plus 32 notes, which is one of my personal favorites for sequencing melodies. This mode gives you the combined ability to play notes in real time, but also access to the sequencer. And this pretty much works the same as the drum sequence. A fun tip here is you can hold select and select the notes of a chord and program in a whole chord on a step. You can also do this by holding specific notes. Maybe we want these notes. We want this on that step. So you can just hold the notes and then program it to the step that you want. Next, let's look at recording and editing. And first, we're going to look at working with MIDI. You can record MIDI in real time, freely, or with fixed bar length. You can use the repeat and accent buttons to enhance your performance abilities. You can also quantize notes, and you can capture MIDI that you played without having been recording. A tip that in note mode, right, when you're playing notes here, that when you have a MIDI track selected, it is automatically armed for recording. In session pad mode, however, things have to be manually enabled for recording. To do this, all you have to do is press and hold the display button under the track name to record enable it, or you can hold the record button and select the track to record enable it as well. You can record notes into armed tracks simply by pressing the record button and then playing the pads. If you want the click track, then press the metronome button and it will enable the metronome, and it's blinking on and off to indicate that it's on. If you press it again, then there's no blinking, it means it's off. If you have a count in enabled, that count in bar will show itself on the display before it starts recording. To change your count in, again, you can hold the metronome button and you can select it. I'm gonna hit the click so I can hear the count in, and let's go ahead and just record some notes in 2, 3, 4. hit record to stop your recording, and it will automatically start to loop. If playback is continuing and you've stopped the recording, if you hit record again, then it will toggle overdub mode. I'm going to hit new to create a new clip. I'm going to hit record to start recording again. I'm going to hit record once again to stop. And then once playback is continuing, I can hit record a third time to overdub notes. 2, 3, 4. So now we're looping, right? If I hit record again, I can add notes. Now we're back to play. Let's look at the new button because it is a very handy button when you're jamming and you're coming up with ideas. And what this will do is stop playback of the currently selected clip and prepares an empty clip slot to record on the same track. I'm going to hit play and play this clip, and I'm going to hit new, and that's going to just create an empty clip slot on the same track. So then I can start jamming a new idea, right? So I'm going to go ahead and hit new. You'll notice that it stopped playback, and now we have an empty clip slot ready to go. So whenever I want to, I can hit record and record a new clip. And for now, let's go ahead and explore the fixed length button. So you can press this button to set the size of the clip to a predetermined length. All right, so if I press and hold this, you can change the length of, your fixed length. So for example, let's go ahead with 4 bars. So now if I hit this button, it'll be flashing on and off to indicate that it's on. When I hit record, it will automatically create a clip of 4 bars, and I don't have to worry about stopping the recording. All right, so let's give that a go. 2, 3, 4. Next, I want to talk about this capture button, which is super handy. Let's say that you're just playing along and you're just jamming. You're just playing this instrument, feeling it out, seeing if you can come up with ideas. But I'm sure this has happened to every single one of you. Sometimes when you're jamming, something happens that was incredible, but you weren't recording. That's where this button comes in. All right, so I'm just going to go ahead and hit play and just start jamming some stuff. Let's say I really like that. I could hit the capture button, and you'll notice that it captured that entire performance and it just selected the last part and looped it. Maybe there's just some magic that happened here. Either way, with this capture button, you have the whole clip, which then you can get into to edit and change. I'm just gonna go ahead and zoom in here and show you the quantize function. So we have a quantize button, and what this will do is snap the notes to the grid of the selected clip. If you press and hold this, you'll access your quantize settings. You have the swing amount. If you want to add swing, you have the quantize to what resolution you want to quantize to, and then the quantize amount. If you don't want it to be like 100% on the grid like a robot, you might want to do like 85. So it gets 85% closer to the grid. Now, with those settings enabled, I can hit quantize, and you'll notice that it snapped everything closer to the grid of this clip. Notice how it tightened up the end there, but it took away the kind of strums that I did, and that may or may not be something you want. So you got to be careful with quantize to make sure that it's actually benefiting the part that you're doing and not taking away what gives it its character, but also making sure that it's on time and that it's listenable. Next, let's talk about clip view. To access clip view, you want to make sure that you hit the clip view button up here, and this will show you clip view on your display. And here you can edit MIDI and audio clips, as well as various clip parameters. And this will change depending if you're working with audio or if you're working with MIDI. With audio samples in clip view, you have access to all the loop controls, same as MIDI clips, but you also have access to the warp control, which will allow you to warp this piece of audio towards the grid of your master clock in Ableton, right? And then with the encoder over warp, you can change the warping algorithms. You also have access to transpose to pitch the sample up or down, as well as the edit controls. So let's talk about editing MIDI clips, which is an awesome new feature that Push 3 has, okay? You wanna make sure that you're in clip view by hitting this button. Let's say, for example, you've played a lot of variations, you've jammed longer performances, and you just want to focus on your clip. You don't want all this extra stuff, right? If you want, you can crop your clip to being whatever it is selected. If I hit crop, you'll notice that now everything outside of this loop has now been removed. Another pro tip is you can just enter edit mode by just moving the jog wheel. which is a lot quicker than having to hit this edit button. Just move the jog wheel and you're in edit mode automatically. And then to exit, again, hit done. And you'll notice as I move this jog wheel, I'm selecting different notes. Different notes are highlighted. And the way this mode works is that there's always a note highlighted and ready for editing. You can see that no matter where I am, there's always some note that's highlighted. Whenever you have a highlighted note, let's say this hi-hat, right? Then you can adjust that selected notes parameters with all of the encoders up here. When you're adjusting MIDI clips for melodic instruments, we go to edit mode, you'll notice that we get pitch. If you wanted to, if there was a note in your melodic sequence that was not the right pitch, instead of re-recording the whole part, you could select that specific note and change the pitch. In drums, you can see drum pad. You can actually change what note is playing what pad after the fact, which is super handy. Let's say this note, instead of being a hi-hat, well, I wanted this to be a snare, right? So I could just literally change this to being a snare, right? By moving the drum pad. To edit different notes, you simply have to keep scrolling and it will sequentially go through all the notes in your sequence. If you want to edit multiple notes at once, we'd have to select them all. If I wanted to select all of these notes, all you have to do is highlight a note and press the jog wheel to select it. Then from there, you just want to move to the next note in your sequence and select it as well. And you'll notice that they turn solid white when they are selected. But now let's go to this third note and select it. Now all three of these notes are selected and any edits that I do will affect all of these notes. You can also select all notes or deselect all notes with these controls, which can be handy. If you want to delete a note, all you have to do is highlight it and press delete. If you want to undo that, again, you always have the undo button. Next, let's look at working with audio. Push 3 has a built-in audio interface that you can use to record audio directly from microphones, guitars, synthesizers, directly into clips for sampling, editing, warping, etc. You want to make sure is that the input is set to the right channel for that device. To access your inputs and outputs, go to the mix view, hit it again to get to track mix view, and then you get your input and outputs control. Generally, if you're recording something, you're going to want it to be on auto so you can hear what you're doing, right? And whatever you're recording, you can hear what you're recording. And you just want to make sure that the right input is selected. I have input 1 selected because this microphone is going into the input 1 behind the push. And finally, you want to adjust the amount of gain so that it is the proper amount of gain for what you're recording. And to do that, all you have to do is go to your settings, audio tab, and adjust the gain for your input, right? So if I go here, you can adjust the gain from here. Whether it's guitar, whether it's a microphone, whether it's an external synthesizer, make sure that you have the right preamp selected and that your gain is looking pretty healthy. Audio tracks have to be armed to be able to record audio into them. Just selecting an audio track in note mode, it's going to be armed. However, if you're in session pad mode, you have to press and hold that audio track to enable recording. In note mode, recording audio is the same as MIDI. All the settings and all the controls are the same, but in session pad mode, you want to press any of the empty red slots to start recording into the clip. And then you want to hit that pad again to stop recording. What I'm going to do is record myself blowing into this bottle, into this microphone, into a clip slot just to demo this. Let's be in clip view so we can see what we're recording in real time. So let's give that a go. Stop the clip. So there you go, there's our audio clip. When you have an audio sample recorded or loaded into a track, you can go to clip view to make sure that you can see that clip and access these settings. And loop and warp are on by default, which is handy for musical instruments or any parts that you're recording. But for a random sample like this, might not want that, so we can get finer control over what we're going to do with this sample. To warp or unwarp something, just simply hit this button. I'm going to go ahead and hit edit so that we can start to adjust this sample. In this mode, I can now select the beginning position of the sample. So I'm going to go ahead to the beginning of the sample, just a little bit before the audio, and set this to 111, which will make that the beginning of the sample. I'm going to hit done. And now I can adjust the start and end of this loop. So maybe I don't want it to loop and I want to make the end position a little bit closer to the actual end. Now I've kind of edited the sample to be a little bit more workable. And if I wanted to, I could transpose this as well. One thing to note is that when you're working with audio clips, you can use the convert button to convert the audio clip to various different things. So I'm gonna go ahead and hit this convert button. You can see that we can convert this audio sample to a simpler, to a drum pad, or we can convert it to harmony, melody, or drums audio to MIDI, which is fun to play around with. But for fun, let's go ahead and convert this to a simpler. Now we have a new track that got created with a simpler device on it. Can play this bottle in a melodic way, right? Believe it or not, that is the sound of a bottle. Perfect segue. Let's talk about working with samples, which Push 3 is a powerhouse at. You can play Push's pads in a variety of ways using the simpler instrument in 3 different modes as well. The 3 modes that you have access to in simpler are classic, one shot, and slicing. Once you load a sample, you'll see the waveform in the display along with the main simpler controls. The controls will change depending on what mode you're in, and by default it loads classic mode in the top right hand corner there. In classic playback mode, it's best for creating melodic and harmonic instruments using pitched samples. If we go back to our bottle that we recorded, right? This can create a melodic instrument, which is a good use case for the classic sample mode. I can adjust the start position, we can adjust the length, we can adjust all the stuff, but we can play this like an instrument. Right, we can add effects, we can trick this out, but this is essentially like a melodic device. We have access to our 64 notes, we have access to our melodic sequencer, we have access to our 32 notes with the melodic sequencer all together with the sample. A lot of flexibility there. If you hit the sampler, you can get into deeper settings of the sampler controls and you can toggle loop on or off. You can use the divided by 2 or the times 2 control to double the length of the loop and stretch it out, or to reduce the length of the loop and speed it up. Notice that in one shot mode on the simpler, that no matter what pad I hit, the whole sample will trigger. It's a different way to interact with your samples. All the controls, warp as 1 bar, divided by 2 times 2, crop, reverse, all that kind of stuff is exactly the same as the previous simpler mode. One of the differences in controls between these 2 modes is the trigger and gate option here. And essentially, this determines how a sample fades after the pad is released. With trigger on, it doesn't matter how long you hold a pad, the whole sample will trigger. With gate on, the samples will fade as soon as you let go. Finally, we have slice playback mode, which is one of my favorites. Really cool mode here. And what this does is it non-destructively slices the sample so that the individual slices can be played back from the pads. So you can create and move slices manually or choose from a number of different options for how Simpler will automatically create slices. This mode is ideal for working with rhythmic samples and drum beats, but I've had some really cool results doing this with melodic stuff and all sorts of weird samples. It can really create interesting parts. In this mode, the grid will show you the playable pads that you have and the number of slices that you have. All the zooming parameters and the warp parameters and the divided by 2 and the times 2 controls are the same as the other sampling modes, but you can see now that we have dark red pads lit up here on Push 3 that represent different slices of the sample. Right now, this is sliced up by transients. In transient mode, the slices are placed on the sample's transients automatically, and the sensitivity encoder determines how sensitive Simpler is in detecting those transients, all right? So if I go ahead to the sensitivity control, I can adjust how many slices Simpler is doing to the sample. The next mode is beat mode, and this essentially will slice the slices for musical beat divisions. The division encoder selects the beat division in which the sampler is slicing this. Right now, it's just slicing this straight in quarter notes. The next mode is region. What this will do is slices will be placed in equal time divisions. It just places slices at specific time intervals regardless of the content. And then my favorite is manual, where you can create your own slices. And when manual is selected, no slices are placed automatically. Instead, slices are created by manually enabling the pad slicing control and tapping empty pads as the sample plays back. To create manual slices, you want to tap the pad that is highlighted to begin playback from that slice. And then when the sample reaches the point where you would like to create an additional slice, like another drum hit, for example, you want to tap the next empty pad. Then a slice will be placed there and then be assigned to that pad. And then you want to continue for any pads onward, right, for the whole sample. So I typically do this with the nudge control, so you can adjust the slice area to be exactly where you want it as you're creating it. And then once you're happy with your slices, you can go ahead and turn pad slicing off. Let's go ahead and give this a go. I'm gonna have Nudge close by here, and we're gonna start creating slices. That's pretty good. So I'm gonna turn this mode off, and now I have access to these different slices that I've created. Now you can really play with this sample in a whole different way than its original layout with the slices that you've created. The way that the slices get laid out is from left to right in the first 4 columns going upwards. If you continue to make slices, they'll keep going up here, and then they'll eventually load on the second half in rows, right? Going up by 4 until you have a maximum of 64 slices. A super awesome hack. If you want to go deeper with the control over your individual slices, you can hit the convert button. You can convert this to a drum rack. We now have all of these slices on individual pads in the drum rack. Effectively, what it does is it creates new, simpler devices for all of these slices. And now you can control all of these samples independently and adjust their transposition. You can add effects on separate controls. You can sequence them in with the same mode as the drum sequencer. You can use 16 velocities. It unlocks a lot of possibility for your slices and brings it to a whole other performable drum kit. Next, let's talk about parameter automation, which is a big part of the Push and Ableton workflow, is that you can record in automation. It's super awesome. So changes you make to a device and mixer parameters can be recorded as automation on Push and saved to clips. And you can do this with pretty much any control. And the automate button toggles automation recording on and off. When it's red, it's on. I'm just gonna go here, go back to 64. I have this dulcimer instrument and I have all these controls. Right, I have a filter control. Opens up the filter. All of these controls can be automated in time with a clip. The way to automate a parameter, all we have to do is hit record and make sure that this automate button is set to red, hit record and change it. So notice that that parameter is now moving by itself and that automation has been recorded. Pro tip for you, if you want to delete the automation you've recorded onto a parameter, you just have to hold delete and then tap the encoder of that parameter and it will delete the automation, right? You can see that there's a little white dot that shows that there's automation on something. Fun fact that if you hold delete and tap an encoder that doesn't have automation, it will restore it to its defaults for that device. Good thing to know is that the little white dot represents that there is recorded automation on that parameter. One thing to realize is that if you go ahead and adjust this parameter after the fact, this will override the automation. And now the automation turns gray. Now when I play this back, the automation we programmed is gone. If you want to re-enable your automation, all you have to do is hold Shift and press Automate, and that will re-enable all of the automation that you have recorded and that you've overridden by changing the parameter. You can also automate specific steps in a sequencer, which is super overpowered. And I'm going to show you this with this drum kit. So you can record automation using the steps in the step sequencer. And depending on the display mode, different parameters will be available to you to automate on the selected clip, right? Let's go ahead to the device view so we can see a few more parameters that we can automate. To record automation on a step, all you have to do is hold that step. So let's say this specific hi-hat, and you can change the filter. And you'll notice that now we have a little automation indicator. And now you'll notice that if I play this, this parameter will automate to that just for this step. You can also do this with multiple steps at the same time. If we hold all of these, right, maybe we want the tone to shape up for those specific steps, let go. Now it's going to only automate for those steps that we selected. And pro tip, you can also set step automation on steps that don't have notes. Let's say maybe here we wanted to have a low cut filter just for that step. Then we can do that. And when we do playback, look at this automated control. They're kind of inaudible in this example, but you get the point, right? You can automate anything step by step. Maybe it's an amount of delay. Maybe it's just a filter, right? Maybe it's the pitch. Sky is the limit. Next, let's talk about track control and mixing. If we go to the mix view by hitting the mix button up here, you can stop, mute, or solo selected tracks using their respective buttons. We have these stop, mute, and stop clip button, as well as a lock button, where you can do all of those functions on specific tracks. You can control the track volume, pans, and sends. And then again, brings you to track mix control view. This lets you choose specific settings for that one track and go deeper. It's two different ways of looking kind of at the same thing. However, this mode is where you access the inputs and outputs for that track. Regardless what mode you're in, the encoders will control whatever mode you're selected in. When I'm on volume, this encoder will control the volume for this drum track, right? If I go to pans, I can control the panning of this drum track left and right, bring it back to the center. If I go to sends, I can send this to a reverb, bring it down, and all of these controls are congruent with their respective tracks. If we go to the next mode, we can see all of the controls for this specific track. Right now for the drums, we can see the panning, the reverb send, the delay send, the other reverb send, the other delay send, and the track panning as well, all specifically for this track. It's also worth noting that you can select your master track by hitting this button here, and then you have your master track controls. In the first mix mode with drum racks, you can open them up and mix all of the pads in your drum rack directly on mix view by opening up a rack. And you can also do the same with your group, right? If you close your group, there's your group mix, but if you open it up, you can control the level of all the tracks within your group. Almost there, baby. Let's talk about session view. Session view gives you an overview of all the tracks and clips in your set, and you can easily launch clips and scenes and combine clips from different scenes into new ones. Super good for experimenting, for seeing different ideas and how they can work together, and eventually get the main sections of a tune as a rough arrangement before throwing it back into Ableton. This is ideal for live performance. If you have all of your tracks ready and they're good to go for live performance, you can load them into session view and have them ready to trigger. And you have access to two views for session view in push 3. We have session view up here, right, where we can see on the display an overview of session view and our different clips and our different tracks. And we also have session pad view by hitting this button, and all of our pads now become a display for session view as well. Another cool tip is you can hold select and hit stop clip to stop all clips, which is handy if you just want to stop what's going on and rebuild from there. Let's focus in on the session screen mode. So this lets you trigger clips while still being in note mode on the pads. Let's say you want to jam around here. Let's go to 64 pad mode, but you still want to be able to launch clips. This is where this mode really comes in handy, where you can be playing but also be controlling clips at the same time. You can navigate through clips and scenes and tracks with the jog wheel or the session D-pad, right? So you can notice that I'm navigating different scenes and I can move to different tracks left and right here, right? Just with the jog wheel, go up and down scenes and go left and right to select specific clips or specific scenes. If you launch a clip that's already playing, it will re-trigger. You can record clips into ARM tracks all from here, which makes it super useful. You can use session view to find clips to edit in clip view. Let's say you wanted to edit this clip, right? Just select it and then go to clip view, and now you can edit that specific clip. And finally, let's talk about session pad mode. This is the same as a display, but this lets you launch clips and scenes directly with the pads. Each column represents a different track, and each pad in a column represents a different clip on that track. Note that only one clip can be playing per track. So I can't have this clip playing and this one. It's one or the other. The octave buttons and the page buttons will move by grids of 8 by 8 of clips. You can see a ton of stuff just by navigating here with these buttons in terms of where your clips are in your set. And if we go ahead and stop all these clips and go ahead and start one, right, so you have that drum beat. And you'll notice that when I start to hit another pad, it's going to start on the downbeat. It's flashing green. Right, so now we have another layer going on. And if a pad is unlit, it means there's no clip there. And just a little fun tip is that if you want to stop a clip, you can hit an empty pad outside the playing clip to stop it. You can also stop clips by holding stop clip and hitting that track. The editing functions for pads in session pad mode are pretty intuitive, right? You can copy a clip by holding duplicate, selecting it and putting it to a new track. Now I've just duplicated that clip to a new empty clip slot. If you want to delete something, just hold delete and touch that pad, it will delete it. Oh my God, boom, we did it. We went over all of the main functions that you will see on push 3. I covered most of everything that you will need to be able to master this instrument and understand if it is for you. This thing can do so many things. The sky is the limit, infinite possibility. And it's a super intuitive tool for performing, for sequencing things, for playing instruments, for designing instruments in your own unique way of doing things using samples. This thing is totally next level. And the fact is that everything I just showed you, you can do on your couch. You can do this on the go, right? You can do this live with this device. So, you know, we've just scratched the surface of what is possible with Push 3. Now you understand at a really deep level what this thing can do. You understand all its functions, all its modes, all the secret shortcuts, all the tricks, and you can really take this and run with it. The next step to really being able to express yourself through this instrument is to learn how to play it. So if you're interested in learning how to play Push 3 as an instrument, I invite you to check out my in-depth playlist covering music theory on Push. I'll link it in the card above. So I'll see you in that next video.